Welcome, welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Radical Homecoming, Reclaiming Spaces, Identities, and Futures. My name is Rashida Phillips, and I am the Director of Housing, Futures, and Land Justice at PolicyLink. PolicyLink is a national research and action institute advancing racial and economic justice and equity by lifting up what works and centering the solutions of those who are most impacted by social injustice, including the 100 million around the country who are at or below the poverty line. We advocate for groundbreaking policy changes that enable everyone, especially people of color, to be economically secure, live in healthy communities of opportunity, and benefit from a just society. I also show up to this work as an Afrofuturist and as an artist. I'm the creator of the Afrofuturist Affair, which was an event and long-running platform in Philadelphia, and co-creator of Black Quantum Futurism Collective, of which I'm a part with my partner, More Mother. And we do interdisciplinary art and writing all around the world, and a lot of different community engaged projects, including the Community Futures Lab. Today, we gather here to explore the intersections of Afrofuturism, Indigenous futurisms, and the principles of environmental, economic, and spatial justice. As we close April, we're celebrating Housing Futures Month, which builds on the legacy of Fair Housing Month each April. And it challenges us to envision and craft housing models that ensure stability and prosperity for all. We take this month to celebrate the progress made and the paths yet to be paved. This month serves as a dedicated time for us to raise awareness about the crucial role that housing and land plays in our communities and in our own lives. And we urge innovative collaboration to address both the current and future housing challenges that we have. It's a journey that demands our courage to envision and secure futures where everyone has the right to stable and healthy homes, unrestricted by geographical boundaries or other things. Radical homecoming is a bit of an audacious idea. It is about more than just returning to a place, to a physical space. It involves a deep and reflective process of re-engagement with our communities, with our histories, and with our identities. It's informed by the wisdom of our ancestors and by the liberatory narratives that have guided them. This concept invites us to dismantle oppressive structures and reclaim agency over our futures, our collective futures, our individual futures, our communal futures, and create the spaces that truly reflect and accommodate our diverse experiences and aspirations. Today, I am so excited and proud to just be joined by such a brilliant panel of artists, cultural workers, and scholars. We're joined today by Grace Dillon, Ingrid LaFleur, Edyka Chilomé, Tonika Lewis Johnson, and Tanaya Winder. Through their presentations, discussions, and artistic expressions, they will help us explore and construct visions of the future that embrace the full richness of our histories and the balanced potential of our collective power. We will hear artistic and scholarly presentations that do more than just envision new futures. They demand it. And through their insights, we're reminded to engage deeply, to dream boldly, and to commit ourselves to the radical act of homecoming, to ourselves, to our communities, and to the land that nourishes and sustains us. With that, I would love to invite you all to engage with us on these questions and topics that we'll be exploring today. And so we're going to post the link into the chat for you all to click on. It will lead you to a platform called Padlet. And on the Padlet, you'll be able to respond to questions that ask about, what do you think of radical homecoming? How do we reclaim these spaces, identities, and futures together? So as you hear from the speakers today, I invite you to engage with us on that platform, add your thoughts, add your questions, add your visions for the future. And it's pretty easy. You don't need to sign up. You can either add as a comment or it'll give you instructions right there on how to add your thoughts. And you can also add images, you can add videos. It's not just limited to words. And so we invite you to engage and imagine and dream with us through the Padlet. And before we get into and hear from our speakers and presenters, I would love to just give a little bit of background of and grounding of why we're here together and why we're using this lens. And one of those ways, right, is one of the reasons why is because there's these sort of inextricable links between space, race, and time that are deeply intertwined, that shape our experiences and identities, and that shape power dynamics across historical and contemporary contexts. And that's how we approach the work, understanding those linkages, understanding the historical foundations, the legacies of colonization, slavery, segregation, that demonstrate how race has been spatially inscribed and temporally extended into time, that has affected generations today, generations to come, and generations before us. And so we understand those historical foundations and historical linkages. We also understand that space manifests itself through race, again, right? Racial identities and inequalities are mapped onto physical spaces through practices like redlining, gentrification, environmental racism. These things show us how space is racialized. But we also know that space is temporalized too, right? And so these spatial injustices, again, show up in time. They're not just confined to the past, they persist over time. They influence future possibilities and the pace of what we consider to be social change. And so when we think about how we reimagine these futures, we have to recognize those entanglements. We have to recognize the entanglements of space, race, and time that open up avenues for reimagining and reshaping futures through reparative justice, through transformative spatial practices. And so that's why I'm so excited to have the panel of folks here today, right, to help us think about what it means to envision that, right? It's not just about policy, and I'm excited to work at a place where I can show up as an Afrofuturist, right, and think about how things like arts and culture, how thinking about different ways of knowing and different ways of experiencing space and time show up in this work, and how it's important to these conversations. We cannot dismantle these systems if we're not dismantling this underlying bases for these systems. And so that's why bringing in Afrofuturism, Indigenous futurisms feels really important. These ways of knowing, it recognizes things like oral traditions, like storytelling and communal wisdom as vital forms of knowledge. It challenges dominant narratives by validating the diverse cultural perspectives that are available to us as we're doing spatial planning, as we're figuring out how we exist in relationship to land and space and time. It also, these ways of knowing and approaching the world emphasize emotional, spiritual, and cultural dimensions beyond physical and, beyond the physical. And so it also fosters spaces and spatial dynamics that can heal, that can empower, and that can reflect our community's holistic needs and aspirations across our communities. And so that's why it's really important for us, as we're, again, celebrating housing futures, celebrating, spatial futures that we have together, to apply these liberatory frameworks, to not just, engage in the aesthetic aspects of it, which is amazing as well, right? And we need that, we need the vision and the visuals in order to dream new things. But right, it's also, again, our way of knowing, our frameworks for how we approach, how we do our work, how we live in existence with each other. And so invoking Black, Indigenous, and Brown spatial and temporal imaginaries, right, restructures how we engage with each other, and how we again engage in relationship with our housing, with our land. And with that, I would like to bring up our first presenter. And again, just excited for what you're about to hear today, and the different ways that folks are engaging with this idea of radical homecoming for displaced communities, for people who have been displaced from their homes, from their lands, from all of those things. And so our first presenter today will be Edyka Chilomé. And just to read a little bit about her, she's a queer child of migrant activists from the occupied lands of the Zacateco, Mexico, as well as Lenca, El Salvador people, and was raised in migrant justice movements, grounded in the tradition of spiritual activism. A published and seasoned poet, playwright, filmmaker, and cultural strategist, Edyka is a 2018-19 Intercultural Leadership Institute Fellow, a 2020 VONA Voices alumna, a 2020 inaugural fellow and second-year facilitator in the Black, Indigenous, People of Color Sci-Fi Screenwriting Lab, created by Los Angeles-based organization Justice for My Sister, a 2021 recipient of the Sundance Institute Uprise Grant, and a recent inaugural fellow of the Constellations Design Lab created by the Center for Cultural Power. Through the multidisciplinary work of Edyka Chilomé, Edyka aims to explore and support transcolonial land-back strategies across Indigenous diasporas in the U.S. and Global South. Welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today at Radical Homecoming.
It's a pleasure, Tumarcino. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Mine is a lineage of futurists, visionaries who bled litany from in between their legs, drafted new constellations on the dirty canvases of their grief, cradled unnamed oceans birthed in the belly of a wild rage. I have forgotten their names, though I will never forget how to move in the dark waters of their unspoken memories, cautiously, carefully learning to translate the blueprints of their joy, pushing against the possessing currents of their shame. I have remembered my name, told to take hold of a hope that I could exist without the chains of a tortured past, and a joy that might last outside of a fleeting moment, a hidden smirk, a timid gesture of selflessness. I have found a new name. Coded in the movements of germinating waters, there is a future to be born yet. New words to be spoken, songs to be sung, medicine to be made. I remember our names. Memories of descendants born free in explosions of tenderness and the joyful sounds of tumbling walls. Descendants who have met the crevices of freedom and know she is more than an aching dream that bruises and bleeds us all. I remember a future full of food, grown by mothering hands, respected stores of freed lands and healed waters, baptized by the laughter of children and fathers named collaborators and ambassadors of hope. I remember a future full of pride, where one knows how to celebrate when differences collide, enamored by the beauty of traveling worlds and building bridges with their hearts, knowing love is the most valuable art, and we, the earth, its most masterful teacher. My name is Edyka Chilomé, and I am truly, truly, truly honored to be here today, to be a part of a long-standing ancient tradition of folks coming together of different nations, different spaces, different geographies to imagine and invoke and manifest futures, and to keep the memories that allow us to do so. I'm truly, truly, truly excited about what connections and constellations will be born of this, of those watching, of those sharing, of those of us who continue doing this work through generations. And I'm particularly honored for the invitation as a poet, for bringing poets to the table. I believe being a poet is a designation of spirit, the way that we see the world, whether we write poems or not. And it's important for us to invoke this kind of what I understand as spiritual technology, a way to kind of make sense of the muddiness, of the texturedness, of the nuances of our existence that does not fit in the boxes of settler colonial frameworks, as we will discover, as we know in our bones, as we know in our voices. So I'm excited to be a part of the conversation today and to learn and to hear. And to, again, understand that what we're doing, whether we are in person or not, this ritual of creating circle, of coming together with the materials that the earth offers us, and sorting through the extraction and the violence and the terror that doesn't need to be a part of this creation and this invoking. But as it is, we are called to unravel, untangle the ways that we can make that change. So I'm going to share a few pieces of poetry, poetry being my favorite technology, because it is a seduction of feeling. It is a seduction to come back to our humanness. And And, you know, as I do many different things, poetry always becomes the medicine that I feel like so many of us come back to in need. So this second poem is called The Archive of Our Relation. And I think it's the contemplation of understanding how, as was already spoken, the different geographies, the different colonial settler projects across this continent, up and down, and all the other continents all around this planet, and how so many of us are connected and so many of us have forgotten that connection. And this poem was a response to thinking about how do we leave roadmaps for our descendants to understand where we are now, right? And this is part of the work that we do, right? We create the sacred archive to not only for us to imagine, but for the descendants to come back to and continue that work. So this is the archive of our relation. I admit the mourning is constant. The names, the words, the whispers, colors, and textures that were lost, persecuted, poisoned, disinherited, extracted, cut down, shaved, kidnapped, unclaimed, and forgotten in endless war. I too report. My silence has not saved me. Yet running water calls spirits hidden in me carefully, waiting for me to quiet the mind. They may wake me right on time to witness the great expanse, a dance so tender it gently wakes the sun. In gratitude, the sun rises, offers its power so that we may see all that has been done and all that is yet to come. In humility and courage, I rise, offer my power so that I may see all that has been done and you who has yet to become. Tumal Sinu. May the sun always shine on you, a prayer weaved by the most precious parts of me, a breathing memory, the most potent offering to our becoming. I report. The water, the earth, the seeds, and the grace of a dancing sky remain a pure reflection, the wealth of our inheritance, the heart of our connection, the archive of our relation, if we so choose to co-conspire, to remember. Agua es vida. Water is life. We are the water, and remembering has offered us our lives. Love letters bloom beautiful in anticipation of you. Travel guides to the ancient futures that are due. Living memory of gestation and labor. Humble testimonies conspired in your favor. You see, more than hope, we hold a deep knowing. All creation moves in circles. All that was once dead is reborn. The breaking of the seed, a necessary violence. Forgiveness, a necessary blooming. Resistance, a necessary rooting. Rebuilding, a defining act of courage. Letting go, a radical act of love. I too agree with the trees. I do not shy away from the darkness, nor do I fear the wind. I remember the water and take root in the memory of you, the living archive of our relation. A sweet and sacred confirmation that we are still alive. Let's see. 12:23. I have no idea when we started, but I got two more pieces if that's cool, Rashida.
Yeah, you're golden, please.
Okay, cool. So this next piece is you know, I don't think I've ever titled it because I feel like titles, much like one word identifiers for our identities, are so sometimes just not appropriate. They're not enough. But it's one that has traveled with me. And I think often about the lovely poetess and friend Aja Monet, from New York, a diasporic Caribbean poet, blues poet, she identifies as. She talks about being a poet as being a musician, operating as a poet in the same way musicians operate, in terms of the ways that the words create rhythm and music and sound, and the ways that we respond to the rhythm and sound of creation and of life. And so this piece, you know, as we speak, right, in this ancient tradition of speaking the stories, speaking the memories, speaking the visions of future, as we're creating them with our words, with our stories. It feels so important to ground ourselves in that the words have power, right? The alchemy of words is so real. The spelling of words is so real. And it's not just the intellectual concepts, it's the way these words resonate, these truths resonate in our bodies. If you've ever had that feeling that's like, oh, that's true. I never knew how to say that, but I feel it. I lived it. I know it in my life, in my body, in my ancestral memory. Those moments, right, remind us that our bodies hold this wisdom, that our spirits hold these memories and these certainties and these things to be truth. And so this poem is dedicated to that processes that become such an important resource as we're navigating coloniality and the ways they try to separate us from that, to alienate us from that. So here goes. I believe our souls have memories of sound from the beginning, the creation of the universe. See, I believe our souls have memories of sound from the beginning, the creation of the universe. Like with every melodic sentence and paragraph, our collective memory immersed, our souls are laced by the sounds that our grandparents heard. Like the ghostly memory of a heartbreak will always subconsciously be part of who we are and what we heard. I believe our souls have memories of sound from the beginning, the creation of the universe. Like with every melodic sentence and paragraph, our collective memory immersed, our souls are laced with the sounds of the ancestors heard. Like the rhythmic drumming of a heartbeat will always subconsciously be what we prefer. Melodies that take us back to the movements of our foremothers, and rhythms that unite our hearts and bring our souls closer to our brothers, and pitches that resemble a ghostly memory of self, and tempos that echo the heartbreaks that our grandparents felt. So when your soul is awakened and recognizes sound, take it as a reminder from the divine that you are bound, and don't take it lightly that your body is a vessel sacred by every means and far more complex than the mental, because it carries the stardust of creation. It is proof of life through the process of menstruation. It bleeds secrets that challenge the forces of alienation. See, I believe that music is the spirit of the body, the light that reveals the godly, the majestic reminder that we embody the eternal power of life. That one I had to pull up from my body. I was like, wait a minute. All the poets know what I'm talking about. So this last piece, this is a short, if we talk about, in the church where they say the benedictions, the last word, of course, all these rituals are so indigenous to all of us, how we open and how we begin. And this little piece, it's a translated piece. So I'm going to read the first original piece. It's very short in Spanish and then in English. It's called Ven Seremos. Ven seremos. Seremos el nuevo pacto de la tierra. Viento que cosecha llanto y semilla. Lluvia que lava la pena con misericordia. Fuego que invita la promesa de la muerte. Nueva vida, ven seremos. Before I read it in English, I'll say, I come from a lineage of armed revolution, of indigenous uprising in Central America. This is one of my lineages. And in those traditions, we believed in the poets, the cultural workers, what we call trabajadores culturales. And these people traveled with the armies, the people's armies, to speak poems, to speak words, to speak and sing and drum and play instruments in order to remember, to remind us why we were fighting, why we were giving our lives, why we were picking up guns, and the necessity to hold the line for our lands and our people. And so this piece feels so in line with that, right? This little tidbit, this declaration, in English called "Come, we will be victorious." We'll weave the new covenant of the earth, harvest of rain, washing shame with mercy, fire, and calm, death, new life. Come, be victorious. Thank you. for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for activating us, for just weaving these just deep-rooted words, experiences, feelings. Everything you spoke to is just it's what we're here about. It's, you know, what you said about speaking to alchemy, speaking truth to power, the feeling of truth, right? Is you yourself invoke that alchemy. So just appreciate you for bringing your voice, for guiding us through like what it means to live identity and belonging, and just shedding light on that feeling of truth that anchors our journeys towards a radical homecoming. So thank you so much. Yeah, so we're going to bring up our next amazing presenter. And just a few housekeeping tips before we do that. Just want to remind folks, there is closed caption available at the bottom of your screen. We also have a Q&A function if you would like to ask any questions. We'll try to get to them, but likely won't be able to, but we'll be sure to pass them on to our presenters. If they have time or would like to speak to them, they can. But otherwise, there's also an ability to translate the transcript of the closed caption into other languages. And so if you need any assistance, just let us know. Feel free to send us a chat or ask a question in the Q&A if you need help with any of that. And with that, I was going to share my screen and show your nameplate, but it seems like I don't need to do all of that, especially because you have slides, and it just would be awkward to do that. But I am so proud and so excited to bring up Ingrid LaFleur. She is a cultural advisor, futures researcher, Afrofuture theorist, and pleasure activist focused on creating equitable futures using art, culture, and emerging technology. As the founder of the Afrofuture Strategies Institute, she facilitates the development of Afrofuture consciousness by combining foresight methodologies and the cultural movement of Afrofuturism. As a thought leader, LaFleur has led conversations and workshops at Centre Pompidou in Paris, TEDx Brooklyn, Harvard University, and Oxford University, among others. Her work has been featured in the New York Times and Time Magazine, to name a few. LaFleur is an Association of Professional Futurists member attending the University of Houston for an MS in Foresight. And again, just it's a pleasure, it's an honor. I've been in community with you for many years, and it's just been, you're one of the forebearers and carriers of what Afrofuturism is and means, and you've taught me so much about what it means to live in this work. And so thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Rashida, for having me. And I've learned so much from you, and I definitely reference your work often. As Rashida said, I am an Afrofuturist. So I thought I'd start there on my conversation about land reclamation as a spiritual reclamation. So Afrofuturism, sorry, let me move if I can move it, yes. All right, so Afrofuturism is a cultural movement. As Rashida said, it was coined in the 90s, and it centers the dreams, visions, desires of Black people in order to imagine futures according to our own narrative. We love to pull from ancient and near past to help inform our present and give us a new orientation, a decolonized orientation of that future. The cultural movement also is something that I believe helps to create a healthy relationship to the Black body. Anti-Blackness, unfortunately, plagues our entire world. And so I like to think of Afrofuturism as this healing modality. And so therefore, it is something that anyone, no matter your background, can participate in. I have developed over time this idea around Afrofuture thinking. It is based on principles and different ideas that come out of Afrofuture material, which can be found across all disciplines. And so Afrofuture thinking, I just kind of shrunk it down to these 5 different areas. We definitely are about new narratives that decenter modernity and coloniality, which is the mentality that is the legacy of colonialism, which we're all trying to get rid of. It invites us to be in right relationship with all living beings and ourselves. It encourages justice-oriented experimentation. I emphasize justice-oriented because we've had lots of experimentation. We're seeing that a lot in emerging tech and science, but it's not always helpful, and it's oftentimes very harmful for marginalized and vulnerable communities. It requires nurturing. So this is something that we have to kind of invest in by consuming as much, not just Afrofuture thoughts, but also a nice array of future visioning practices, artistic practices, intellectual endeavors. And finally, it's an orientation of fugivity, meaning we definitely are rejecting the established order. And this is because, as our godfather, who's a jazz musician, Sun Ra, says, the possible has been done. It's time to try the impossible. And in order to do that, to be a fugitive is one of the many ways to do that. So, so now that you know my thinking and my base, I want to talk about land. I am currently in Johannesburg, South Africa, and this is a view from my porch. I decided to move to the continent and eventually decided on South Africa about 2019, but I formally moved to Johannesburg last year. And when I was looking for a place, at first I was looking at apartments because that's what most foreigners do because it's easy to manage, especially when you have to travel. But I'm like, I'm on the continent. I am finally here. It's been a dream of mine to base myself here. And so I need to be close to the soil. And so I am renting this amazing house that is across from, it's really tiny, this nature preserve, which is called the Melville Kopes. It's like a rocky, hilly area that you can walk. It's not really hiking because it's not very large. Right next to it is a park, and right next to that is vacant land. I find it to be such a deep blessing to be able to sit on my porch and to see this gorgeous land. And I remember the first day that after I moved in, I could feel my ancestors so happy. It was like they had been waiting for me to return back to this continent that has been calling me my entire life. I have been traveling to many different countries in Africa for over 20 years. And so that kind of grounding really has actually helped my Afrofuture living and the way that I am oriented in this world. A couple years back, when I was living in Johannesburg, I met a woman who is Sangoma. And Sangoma are sacred healers, oftentimes from the Zulu tradition. This is a picture of Mpumalanga, which is north of Johannesburg. And the Songa, Pedi, Swazi, Ndebele, and the Zulu are the main tribes of this area. And I forgot to mention that the Botswana is the land that I'm on now. So with the Sangoma, she was saying that when you're called, there's a particular element that you are associated with. It could be water, for instance, and in her case, it was land. And so she was saying that she's currently in a very interesting relationship with land. She will be called to a piece of land that someone is living on. And in her case, oftentimes those are white families who have acquired the land during colonial era or during apartheid. And who's calling her are the ancestors of that land. And so what happens when she meets with the family, they will admit to a series of disruptions in their normal life that have happened recently, but don't really think that much of it. But for her, she's like, those are the ancestors wanting the land back. And so what's happening is that the ancestors of the land and the ancestors of that family are kind of in conflict. And so there's this spiritual land reclamation that is happening that she can tap into. And I believe that is, well, it's fascinating. But also, it made me think, oh, like, I know I have ancestors as a human being, and I'm constantly in conversation, but it was a wonderful reminder that the land itself, these mountains, this water, has ancestors as well that should be honored and respected and acknowledged. Now, oftentimes the family does not want to move off the land. And so she has to kind of appeal to the ancestors to help mitigate some of those disruptions. But ultimately, the only way to solve it is if they were to move off the land. This is a beautiful area right outside of Cape Town. And it is mostly indigenous to the Khoisan or the Khoikhoi and San people. I actually, some years ago, lived right outside, like really close to this area, and it's quite beautiful. And when I was there was this musician who's Khoisan, who told me that in the pre-colonial era, there was beaches littered with diamonds. Now, regardless if this is true or not, for me, it doesn't matter. I'm all about the imagination. It spoke to the abundance that used to be there that in our modern world will no longer access. And that sort of saddened me, which brings me to this quote. We need our land back so our people can have a future. And without it, we will forget who we are. And so there's this mass movement to reclaim the land, not only in this Cape Town area in the south of South Africa, but across the entire nation. And what they're claiming is not necessarily, as a lot of the Black Africans here are claiming, wanting the land back from during the time when it was taken in the colonial or apartheid era, but they are talking about a pre-colonial reclamation, which means that this goes beyond a settler colonialism. It's really getting into conversations around migration that has happened here on the continent. I found the quote to be really like challenging to some degree. Will you really not have a future if you don't have your land back? Because there is a high possibility that you might not get it back. So what will happen? But then when I start thinking deeper about it, if their land has its own ancestors, that means that it's asking to be treated in a particular way, that only those who are ancestrally tied to the land know how to treat it, which becomes its own cultural practice. So when you don't have access to the land, that particular cultural practice fades away, and along with it, wisdom that me as a non-Khoisan person, it goes beyond what I know and understand. And that wisdom probably could be extremely helpful in how we treat the land today. So one of the things that I've learned over the past like 6-7 years is that our imagination really determines our relationship to the land. And really determines our relationship to futures as well. Some years ago, when I was working in blockchain technology for a startup, I remember my tech team just casually talking about how all humans come from Neanderthals. And as a result of the scarcity of resources on that particular land, humans are very competitive. And when I thought about it, I found it really interesting and slightly odd that there's this assumption that all humans come from Neanderthals. But when you think about it, we casually reference this quite often in commercials, in casual conversation. We'll talk about being in caves and fighting off things. And so the Neanderthal becomes our origin point. And so that is when I really got into how the land defines how we perceive humans and also defines how we relate with each other. And so that scarcity of resources, that land means that we will forever be in a competitive mode. But I thought, as an Afrofuturist, well, what happened if that's not my origin point? What happened if Dinkanesh is my origin point? So Dinkanesh was born 3.5 million years ago on what is on the land of Ethiopia. And so she becomes, for me, the mother of us all. And again, this isn't about scientific facts. It's really about how our imagination is being oriented. So Dinkanesh, we know her as Lucy in the West, but because she was found in Ethiopia, I just knew she had to have a different kind of name. And so Dinkanesh is her Amharic name. Amharic is the language, one of the languages of Ethiopia, and it means you are marvelous. So if we come from Dinkanesh, then we come from a land that is abundant with resources, which means that maybe we aren't as competitive as we think we are inherently, that perhaps we are actually more communal. We're really about co-creation, the mutual care for each other. And that then, if we were to just for a moment really imagine that as our origin point, could possibly shift everything, how we view humans, our relationship to each other, our relationship to the earth and to the cosmos. One of the tenets of Afrofuturism is that spiritual technology has a powerful force that really can serve as the base of all our thinking and all that we do. And we can never be separated from it. There's no such thing. And so this brings me to the concept of animism. I've been deeply connected to animism for many decades. I love this idea of thinking about all living things as having a spiritual orientation, a connection, and that then helps me to connect with that living being. Dr. Bayo Akamalafe, if you don't know who he is, definitely look up his work. He's a brilliant speaker and writer, and he has brought into our lexicon, he's brought it back, animism. And I'm so thankful that he has, because as we ask for these different changes, we have to, different changes, I'm sorry, within the climate. We have to first treat each other, humans, with respect and care. And it is only then that all other living beings will trust that we can respect and care for them, with them in relationship. And so I would like to end with these questions. In service to our collective futures, can animism produce the relationship we need with the earth? And are we willing to kind of move in that direction? And would animism help us to understand what it means to be stewards of the land and respect those with ancestral knowledge of how to care for the land? I think all of these elements are extremely important, especially to be stewards of the land, to really care, to understand, learn what the land needs, and then to act accordingly. And so on that note, I will end my presentation, and I'm hoping for some amazing questions and conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. Just again, appreciate, the way that you open up pathways for us for imagining how art and culture can just radically shift our perceptions of land, our perceptions of our origins. And thank you for leading the way in fostering an Afrofuturist consciousness that's essential for the equitable communities that we're striving to create. You did have one comment. Beverly Bitsagon said, just a comment for Ingrid. I underscore your comments about imagination. The process of imagination is extremely important. It allows us to make room for people and places. If we do not imagine these people and places, we do not make space or possibility for them.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that the power of the imagination, I'm realizing that, and I think that we come to understand that it's really not about facts or truth. It's really about what we imagine and what we assume within that imagination. That's what most people are operating on. So once we can shift the imagination, we can really shift the world.
Absolutely. And you got another comment that you helped give a workable definition for Afrofuturism. And that was part of my question to you of just, how does Afrofuturism show up in practical ways? And I think part of that is part of the work that you do as an Afrofuturist strategist is for a lot of people, this can seem too visionary, too out there, too, it doesn't feel like it has practical impacts or ways that we can show up. But how do you see that in your work?
That's actually what I focus on is Afrofuture thought and practice. And there's such a wide spectrum, right? What does it look like practically in my personal life? And that looks like the way that I set up my home, the rituals that I do daily to honor ancestors. I have altars, where I choose to live, what I choose to wear. But when it comes to things like policy or government, I think it's really important to, when thinking about futures, to be very holistic in that thinking. And Afrofuturism, because it centers Black-bodied needs and desires, it really helps to make sure that whatever we're putting in place is not going to create harm. It helps us to create the proper questions to understand how it will affect our community very specifically. So as a futures researcher, when I look at technology, that is on the horizon. I'm always asking, where will it be implemented? Who's creating it? And does this mean that I'm going to, or my people are going to be regulated as the consumers are being subjected? So I always use facial recognition software. It misidentifies Black women about 60% of the time. And it was still implemented in Detroit, which is a majority Black city. And so right there, you have to ask, what kind of futures are you trying to produce in a majority Black city when you implement that type of technology? Already there's been false arrests, and it's horrible. And so we don't really want to make these mistakes anymore. I think it's really important for us to understand the systems at play. And I think that that's the other part of it. I've created an online course called Dream Weaving with Dinkanesh, and I go through certain systems such as racial capitalism and ideas around necropolitics. I think it's really important to understand how the systems are treating Black bodies now, so that when we're imagining the future, we're not replicating. But most of us don't really understand, no matter if we're Black, white, blue, green, we don't really understand the systems at play. And I think that that is what, for instance, what's happening around the support and advocate the activism around Palestine and Gaza is that people are becoming aware of what colonialism actually looks like and what it means to actually decolonize. It's a difficult process. It's an ongoing process that requires deep historical education. And that's why our futures are so sensitive to our pasts. And without knowing those paths, not just the near ones, but even the ancient ones, the mythical ones, the legends, if we understand that, then we can move into the future with a path that's grounded in ancestral and elder wisdom, and understanding that that will create a sustainability, and one that is really healthy for everyone involved, not just those who are in conflict.
Thank you so much. Thank you again. Appreciate your wisdom, your knowledge, your sharing with us. And we dropped your link in the chat, folks. Please follow Ingrid. Yes.
Thank you so much for having me, Rashida. As always, it's been a pleasure.
So next up, I am excited to bring Tanaya Winder. Tanaya is an author, singer, songwriter, poet, motivational speaker who comes from an intertribal lineage of Southern Ute, Pyramid Lake Paiute, and Duckwater Shoshone nations, where she is an enrolled citizen. She received a BA in English from Stanford University and an MFA in creative writing from the University of New Mexico. Winder's poetry collections include words like love and why storms are named after people and bullets remain nameless. Tanaya's performances and talks blend storytelling, singing, and spoken word to teach about different expressions of love and heart work. Her specialties include youth and women empowerment, healing trauma through art, creative writing workshops, and mental wellness advocacy. Thank you so much for joining us today. So excited to have you and so honored to have you here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to talk a little bit today, for me, just all of the things, and I love that, we talked about constellations and just the energy that is created when we're together. A lot of mine, I think, connects to what's been shared so far. And I feel like a lot of it about this concept of securing home and like honoring the lands, like is very much tied to, this concept of spirit and finding home within yourself. So what I'm going to talk a little bit today is about igniting healing through koaiku, and that is in the Ute language, that is in the Shoshone language. And koaiku means to go back, to go home, to return. And that's going to be a little bit of what I'm talking about today, because for me, I feel like part of that return to home and finding home does have to do with reclamation and with transformation. And so there's a phrase, in the Ute language, because I'm both Southern Ute and Deckwater, Shoshone, and Paiute, all similar language families, but there's a phrase in the Ute language called Tuteveak, which means it's a good day. And I wanted to share that, because for me, I think a lot of it is just about the importance, of honoring our bodies as a home for the spirit by returning to the importance, of tradition, prayer, ways of being. And for me, part of that return has to do with language. So I'm going to introduce myself in my language. I'm going to do it twice. So in the Ute language, I say Mike Nuna Nia Tanaya Winder. And in the Deckwater Shoshone dialect, I would say Nia Nadabian Tanaya Winder. And I used to feel such shame about not being able to introduce myself in my language. I would have other like Dene or Lakota or other Indigenous friends who I would hear be able to speak their language, and I would feel so ashamed that I couldn't speak mine. And it took me a long time to finally realize like that shame is what the colonizers wanted my people to feel. That shame is what they placed onto my grandmother when they took her to boarding school and taught her that her language didn't matter, her culture didn't matter, that being Indian, in her words, wasn't worthy of anything. And that's really where they tried to create this rupture and literally like plucking children from their homelands to try to create that disconnect from land, from home. And so for me, I really just had this empathy and forgiveness just for that part of myself that was feeling that shame, because I shouldn't feel ashamed. I actually feel angry and sad because my language was stolen from me. And so for me, that return to language and holding that language in my throat and my belly and my mouth and my tongue is like returning home spiritually for me. And so I'm going to play a song on my guitar that uses this phrase Tuteveak about it being a good day. In my community, there was an elder for a while in the Southern Ute community who would send like these newsletters, and every week it would have like a different Ute phrase, and he would record himself saying it. And so one time this phrase came across my inbox, Tuteveak, it's a good day. And I thought, for me, my spirit, I feel most at home in my body when I'm singing, being very fortunate to have grown up going to ceremony, singing our traditional songs. And so I wanted to turn that phrase, Tuteveak, into a song. And, I haven't forgotten it since then. So hopefully the Wi-Fi connection is okay. Hopefully you can hear it. If not, just pretend at the end I'll say thank you. But this is called Tuteveak. Turn it down a little bit. Okay. Woke up this morning to greet the day, lit my sage to give thanks and began to pray. Hey, I ask Creator, do what you can to guide my path. That's all I ask. Tuteveak, it's a good day. Ancestors, please protect my spirits, those I hold dearest in my heart. If there are wounds, help me heal them, so others know love even for a minute. Tuteveak, it's So that was 2 Teveak. And so for me, coming home to language, coming home to song, coming home to being in my body through singing, you know, getting that vagal muscle, I think they say, going. It is very spiritual. It is like a prayer, you know, like whether I'm writing poetry or music, like it is like connecting to that higher power, like that we are just vessels for what needs to come through us. And I believe that each and every one of us on this earth, our earthly vessels, like we do have like messages and things that need to come through us to be able to have those connections, to have that healing, to have the home within ourselves of safety and belonging, you know, that we all deserve. And so what comes to mind for me for this is always this quote by this First Nations author, Richard Van Camp. And he has this quote from his book, The Lesser Blessed. And the quote is, "I have to tell you something I said. I'm not going to lie. I have to tell you I have this God-shaped hole in my heart. And I think you do too." And I think so many of us hold that concept, right? Whether it is a God-shaped heart, a creator-shaped heart, a universe-shaped heart, you know, whatever your belief is, and that many of us try to fill that hole with unhealthy things. I think people who are so well versed in like colonialism and capitalism try to fill that by just taking. I need more, not enough. You know, things that do inhibit like land back, or things that do inhibit being in that right relationship, you know, with the land, with all of our relatives. Like they say, indigenous mindset says, you know, all my relations, all things are related. You know, everything has a spirit. You know, the rocks have a spirit, trees. I think that's what was kind of getting at too, is like being able to connect with those. But there's so many things in this life that have tried to disrupt that connection. So I'm going to share a video poem for me that talks a little bit about that extractive energy and how it just shows up from boarding school era to like energy extraction and things like that. And this is a poem I did as a collaboration with an Indigenous visual artist, Moira Villard. Extraction. My grandmother says, boarding school is where people go to die. My hands fumble over needles as she teaches me to embroider and knit. Grandmother, when did you first learn how to sing the songs you carry? Before I was born, they tried to silence us, pierced our tongues with needles, then taught our then girl grandmothers how to sew like machines. Even then, they saw our bodies as land full of resources waiting to be extracted and exploited. We stitch together phrases. My grandmother patiently teaches me words in Indian, as she says. Magwavi means heart. I want to learn how to unbury this. Bury, Sugomi. I want words to undrink the drugs we loved into our veins, because for some of us, this was the only way we knew how to keep breathing. Can we unsuicide, unpipeline, undisappear our dear ones? There is no word for undo, but many ways to say return. We never get to go back to before. Our fathers began evaporating and our mothers started flooding themselves into unglobable rivers because their mothers were taken long ago. We are still searching, dragging rivers red until we find every body that ever went missing. For as long as I can remember, we've been stolen. From reservation to industrial boarding schools, and today our girls, women, and two-spirit still go missing and murdered. I could find no word for this, but Yakui is to sink or disappear. So that was Extraction. You can find the poem on YouTube and the visual, but the published poem is available online in different places as well. And so just as we get to the end of my time here, I just want to share really quickly, a lake that comes from my mother's homeland, and it's Pyramid Lake in northern Nevada. And there's so many different beautiful teachings that this lake gives us. And part of my fear and anxiety and around climate change is just losing, some of these sacred places that we have. This vast, beautiful desert lake is one of the last remnants of ancient Lake Laha'an, which, covered northwestern Nevada millions of years ago. And so this lake is very important to our people. There's fish that our people eat in there, kiwi that are endangered. But there's just lots of stories of belonging that come with this lake. And for me, I feel most at home when I'm in the lake, when I feel that connection to water and to that sacred being. There's a story that this lake was created by this mother who, not knowing if her children were okay or survived, she cried so many tears, she created this lake in the middle of the desert, and her, sadness turned her to stone. And I feel like I used to relate so much to that stone mother. I felt like I had become so desensitized by just so many things that happen in life that I too, when I was younger, felt like I was made of stone, like I couldn't cry when you're supposed to, all of these different things. Until I realized, that lake and that mother's sacrifice was the greatest gift she could give our people, because it gave us this tool to navigate life and healing. Unfortunately, we'll all know pain, we'll all know sadness, but how do you not drown in those tears? And you learn how to swim. And so this lake has offered us many of those teachings. And so for me, when I think about, all of the topics and things we're talking about today and imagining today, for me, a lot of it is just trying to think differently about how to transform different parts of ourselves. And so what I mean is just to close out how I started with that quote about the God-shaped hole, to thinking about, the power of kwaku, the power of returning, is to make your ancestors proud. The way you say this in Shoshone is Uza Dame Nanawani Manusagwan. And that's you make your ancestors proud. So I just encourage people, call your spirit back, use that creator-shaped hole, that God-shaped hole in your heart to bring light into this world that so desperately needs love and healing, and to ignite your fire so that your ancestors know you are here, alive, breathing, dancing, singing, and being all that they prayed for. And so that is my time for today. Thank you all for listening and being present.
Thank you so much, Tanaya. I just really, your presentation, thank you for sharing your hard work and just for these really profound examples of what radical homecoming means, what it looks like, and just for sharing these expressions of love and resilience in storytelling. And it's just, just amazing. I'm close to tears, so I need to move it on. But thank you so much for being with us and again, sharing these brilliant visceral examples and stories of what it means to embody radical homecoming. So thank you.
Thank you.
And if people have any questions for Tanaya, please feel free to add to the Q&A. And if she has a chance, she can respond to them. So next, I am going to bring up Tonika Lewis Johnson. Tonika is a visionary photographer, social justice artist from Chicago's Englewood neighborhood, who illuminates the direct impact of real estate and land use injustices on our daily lives. Her projects like Folded Map, Inequity for Sale, and Unblocked Englewood challenge segregation and discriminatory practices, sparking vital conversations. She advocates for disrupting these patterns by expanding our personal social networks as a key strategy for transformative change. With international acclaim and accolades, including Chicago Magazine's Chicagoan of the Year, Tonika's work has graced prestigious venues like the Museum of Contemporary Art. Recognized as a leader for change, she's a member of the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs, co-founder of the Inglewoods Arts Collective, and spearheads the Folded Map Project, nonprofit demonstrating the power of art and advocacy and community leadership. Thank you so much for joining us. We are huge, huge fans here of your work and so excited to hear from you.
Thank you. I am going to share my screen. Can you all hear me okay? All right.
Yes, we can hear you great.
Perfect. I'm just going to jump right in. I am a multimedia artist, and most of my work, since it deals with land use, historic segregation, a lot of my work is in the actual built environment. So I'll be sharing a lot of that with you. My seminal project is Folded Map. This is what I call the mother of all of my projects. This is the beginning. This project visually demonstrated what segregation looks like in Chicago by using our grid map to pair distant neighbors together who live in racially and economically different neighborhoods. And I use this project to uplift the present state of my South Side, predominantly Black neighborhood, Greater Inglewood on Chicago's South Side. I just wanted to share a few facts to provide context. As I said, my neighborhood is predominantly Black. The home ownership rate is 30%. And I want you to remember that statistic because that is the through line through the rest of the work that I will share with you today. Out of all of these 77 community areas in Chicago, my neighborhood has the most closed schools as a result of the home ownership rate being low. And we also have the largest loss of any community area in the city of housing units demolished, nearly 3,000 just between 2010 and 2020. As a result of those homes being demolished, we quite obviously have the largest number of vacant lots, city-owned and Cook County Land Bank owned. So I just wanted to situate you in the context of my neighborhood before I share with you what Folded Map is. So in Folded Map, the neighbors that live 15 miles apart in my home neighborhood and the sister neighborhood, if you were to fold Chicago's map, these are the neighborhoods that would touch each other. I call those neighbors map twins because they live on the same street, but in completely different neighborhoods, racially and economically. And so Bridget and Carmen are an example of the map twins that I created through this project. And the map twins, once I brought them together, I recorded my conversations that I had with them, and I asked all of them questions about home ownership and how they would describe their neighborhood and allowed them to hear each other answer those questions. So I'm going to share with you just a brief snippet of the map twins, Carmen and Bridget, answering the question of how much did your house cost?
So it's amazing how much Chicago has shifted just in the last couple of years. And when I bought my house 7 years ago, I feel like there was still, Rogers Park was still somewhat affordable in comparison to a lot of Chicago neighborhoods. So I knew I wanted something under $400,000 was what I was looking for. Yeah. I know you're like, well, hold on a second.
And Carmen, you said this building has been in your family. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about kind of the purchase history? Do you know how much it cost at a time? Or?
No, but I believe it probably was $30,000, you know, but in 74, that was a lot of money, but 30,000 and I think it's probably worth a lot more than that now, but never know.
As you can see, in 2020, after decades of ownership, the house was only valued at $90,000. So a lot of my work pretty much uplifts the fact that the legacy of racism is with us today in the current value of homes in Black neighborhoods. And so to continue to help people understand this fact, I wanted to just call your attention again to the home ownership rate of Greater Englewood, which is 30%. Oftentimes, people don't ask the obvious questions of how did this begin? When was the home ownership rate ever higher? And it was that question that led me down the path of exploration and digging into history and coming across the history of land sale contracts. This is the beginning of the home ownership rate being low in my home neighborhood and many other Black neighborhoods in Chicago, as well as across the nation. The home ownership rate is low specifically because of racism through redlining and land sale contracts. And to help you understand what land sale contracts are, I'm going to play just a short clip of this documentary from a report called The Plunder of Black Wealth in Chicago that quantified the amount of money stolen, legally extracted from Black families to the tune of $4 billion.
This is really the origin, in a modern sense, of the racial wealth gap in the United States. And in order to understand that story of how African Americans continue to be at such a position of disadvantage relative to whites all through the 20th century into the 21st century, long after the legal reforms of the Civil Rights Movement, to understand the perpetuation of that gap, we have to return back to this period and understand what were the mechanisms that put Blacks at such disadvantages relative to whites.
Like many Americans, Sally and Albert Bolton aspired to a home in the suburbs or a better neighborhood inside the city. But in the 1950s, those options weren't open to Black families. So they made a down payment on a house in what was called Chicago's Black Belt. For 2 years, they met their monthly mortgage payments on time. Then one day, they received an eviction notice for being late. One time, on one payment.
That was when they went to see my father.
Mark Satter was an attorney who lived in the racially changing neighborhood, North Lawndale.
What they asked of him was just to slow down the eviction. They said, we only missed one payment. Like, we think we could pull this together. And if you could give us some time, we could keep it.
Reviewing the Boltons' papers, Satter was surprised to see that they had paid 3 times what the seller had paid for it. In fact, he explained to the Boltons, this isn't a mortgage, it's a rent-to-own installment contract. And the man who drew it up, Jay Garan, he's the real owner.
After hearing this, they said we were misled in too many ways, and we want to sue him, and we want to stop this.
As Satter prepared his case, he learned that the Boltons were not alone.
And he realizes that throughout the south and west sides of the city, there are brokers who control large numbers of property, and they're all selling on contract, and they're all selling at these huge markups. And he realizes this is horrifically dangerous.
This was the way systems worked. It was a scheme by which someone, could go into a community and take one house and effectively turn it over and over and over and over again. You wanted to evict people. There was incentive to evict people.
Evictions? Contracts? Why? Satter asked himself. What's happening here?
Home ownership is the basis of a happy, contented family life. And now, through the use of a National Housing Act insured mortgage, is brought within the reach of all citizens on a monthly payment plan no greater than rent.
And that's how it works. Say the price of the home you want to buy is $15,000. You make a down payment of $2,000 and the bank lends you the balance, which you pay off at $110 a month for the next 25 years. Part of your payment goes for interest. That's what the bank charges for loaning you the money. The rest pays down your loan. That's your share of the house. With every monthly payment, your share of the house grows. That's called equity. What if you decide to move? You simply sell the house and keep your share. And if the house increases in value, you keep that too. This is how America's building its middle class, and individual families are building wealth, their financial nest eggs. I know, that's how I bought my house, but that's not how black people are treated. Let me show you. It starts with speculators, also called blockbusters. They go into a white neighborhood and knock on doors, telling white homeowners that the blacks are coming. The blacks are coming. Better sell now because the value of your house is going to drop if you don't. I can see your house is worth $15,000, but I'll give you $14,000. Scared, the white homeowner sells. Within days, the speculator hikes the price of the house and sells it to a black family for $27,000. The buyer makes a down payment of $2,000 and is obligated to make payments of $252 a month. So why would anyone buy a house at such a high markup? Because white-owned banks refuse to make loans to blacks, especially if they want to move into a white neighborhood. Desperate for a home and having no other options, they go to the speculator. The speculator draws up a contract. You think it's a mortgage, but it's not. A contract doesn't accrue equity until it's paid off in full. Nada. Nothing. No equity. See, it's right there in the small print. Just check the box and sign your name to agree. So what if you want to move after living in the house for, say, 10 or 15 years? You lose everything. Remember, you don't have equity. You don't have a nest egg to borrow against for a child's education, to make home repairs, or pay for medical emergencies. And like the Bolton family, miss one payment and you're evicted. There's incentive to evict the buyer so the speculator can keep all the money the family has paid and then resell the house to another buyer. Since the Boltons came to me, I've seen court records of hundreds of evictions on this model. Families on both sides are being built so that the speculators make a fortune buying low from whites and selling high to blacks. Federally insured mortgages to whites, price gouging contracts to blacks. Do you see what this is going to do to Chicago's black families and its neighborhoods?
And now, through the use of a National Housing Act insured mortgage.
So now that you understand what land sale contracts are, this is a map of Greater Englewood, and those red dots are the number of homes that were sold to aspiring Black homeowners in the 50s and 60s on land sale contracts. So these red dots represent all of the aspiring Black homeowners who were denied home ownership. And so they were pioneers of home ownership, embarking on this new system, trying to escape terrorism and become homeowners, and they were lied to. And so I want to provide a little more context as to the extent to which land sale contracts was the beginning of the home ownership rate, never properly actualizing to what it could have been.
You know, one of the tragic aspects of the whole land contract situation was that the people who first moved into a neighborhood like Lawndale or Englewood, they were striving middle-class African Americans. They were leaving the Black Belt and trying to go to a place where there was more space and better schools and better housing stock. And so they were moving there with a lot of optimism and paying top dollar for these properties. So the idea, I think the myth today is that, well, these neighborhoods are poor because poor people live there, poor people have always lived there, and that explains it. We don't need to go any further, you know? Whereas in fact, wealth was in these communities and was taken out of these communities very systematically through the process of predatory land installment contracts. You know,
so because of that history and because I found out the number of land sale contract homes in Greater Englewood, I created this project, Inequity for Sale.
In the 1950s and 60s, fake mortgages gave the holder all the responsibilities of a homeowner, but only the power of a renter. The predatory process stole more than 3,300 homes and counting from Black Chicagoans. This is the focus of activist and artist Tonika Johnson's pop-up installation, Inequity for Sale, the latest in her game-changing and thought-provoking creative projects. I met up with her to find out why she picked this as a moment in history that she wanted to highlight.
So being from Greater Inglewood, growing up here and being a lifelong resident of it is really the motivation and inspiration for majority of my work. When you grow up in a neighborhood that has been historically disinvested in and you see how it impacts your personal life, it becomes the point of reference for a lot of my work. I had to travel outside of my neighborhood to obtain access to a lot of the artistic programs I was interested in. I went to high school on the north side because of the lower quality schools that were in the neighborhood as a result of disinvestment. So this issue has pretty much colored not only my life, but everybody who is from this neighborhood.
But now you got this new project called Inequity for Sale, partnering with the National Museum of Public Housing. How did that ball get rolling?
This report called The Plunder of Black Wealth came out, and it put a dollar amount on the money stolen from aspiring Black homeowners whose homes were sold to them on land sale contracts in the 50s and 60s. Greater Inglewood has gained the reputation of being like the poster child of everything wrong in Chicago, but this is the beginning of how that came to be. And so that's when I knew I wanted to do something to breathe new life into this report to help people understand this systemic issue in a more contemporary way.
So these land sale contracts, these scams as we call them, there's predatory lending in a sense, right?
Yes, so it was a discriminatory housing practice that not only sold homes at an extremely high markup to Black families who were redlined into certain communities, but they actually didn't own the homes, and they thought they did. And so that's the insidious part of this discriminatory practice, is that one, it was just unfair, the actual markup of the homes, but also the lie. They were lied to. They didn't have a mortgage, and they were told that they did.
So your project identifies and shows what homes here in Inglewood were impacted by that.
So a lot of the homes that are in Inglewood now that are abandoned, a lot of the vacant lot, they were land sale contract properties. And so I view it as, you know, we're living amongst evidence of this crime, this hidden evidence, and we didn't know it. And when we wonder why our homes in this neighborhood have been devalued, have not appreciated in the way that other neighborhoods have, it's because of this history. So this project is identifying a collection of those land sale contract homes and putting land markers in front of them to acknowledge what happened here in this neighborhood and to memorialize the actual homeowners who were really pioneers.
So I had to share with you the context of this history to explore the of Afrofuturism that I indulge in, which is the alternative reality, what could have been. And so the guiding question that the rest of my work is based off of comes from Amber Hindley, the lead researcher of the report, where she asked the question, if systemic barriers had not prevented Black individuals from owning these homes, what would the home ownership rate of Inglewood be today? And that question led me to also want to ask, if systemic barriers had not prevented Black individuals from owning these homes, what might their homes look like today? So I want to share with you a project that I'm currently working on where it is reimagining what the denied future of those homes would have been if those Black homeowners actually owned their homes. These are land sale contract homes that exist in the neighborhood today, and I am reimagining what they could have been. Here is another one. And another one, just not even reimagining, but just if they were able to own the home and upkeep their home, what it would have looked like. But the project actually allowed me to have a chance meeting with a descendant of one of these Black couples that was sold a land sale contract home. His name is Mr. Melvin Walls. He's close to 70 years old, and he still lives on the same block that his parents purchased a land sale contract home. And he explained to me all of the difficulty that he had in remaining a homeowner, not being able to afford the home repairs. And instead of reimagining, I wanted to incorporate some of the denied equity that he could have had into his home today. And so that's when I decided to create an art project using arts funding called Unblocked Inglewood. And I want to close with the last couple of slides.
Miss Justine Mosley Stevens didn't have the $13,000 she needed for plumbing work, but she didn't have to pay a penny of that. And the help didn't stop there.
They went in and they replaced the furnaces.
That's because Unblocked Inglewood, an organization repairing homes in the neighborhood, did it free of cost. So money no longer keeps families from home ownership.
Sometimes insurance won't cover the gravity of the repairs that they need because the housing value is low. So they're really in a precarious situation where they can't afford to upkeep their home, even though some of these homes are fully paid for.
According to data from the Woodstock Institute, an economic development agency in Chicago, Black homeownership in Inglewood is just 24%. Unblocked founder Tonika Lewis Johnson says it stems from discriminatory practices dating back to the 50s.
Predators came in and offered land sale contracts under the mask of being a mortgage.
I was shocked to find out that it was a problem.
Melvin Wall says his parents thought they were paying a mortgage in this home he grew up in, but found out they were victims of a land sale contract, which means it was a rent-to-own situation.
My father, when it was time for him to pay his bills, he paid his bills.
Well, those bills were paid for nearly 20 years, but after 2 decades, the family earned zero equity.
Don't you ever sell? No. No, if I sell, where would my people go?
It's why Miss Justine ignores the daily texts she gets from large contractors offering to buy her 3-story building.
I'm 75 years old, and I'm still climbing up and down ladders. But if I can do it, you can do it.
Until Unblocked came in, she was putting in windows, fixing lights herself, while working with neighbors to mow grass. It's the type of neighborhood where you find family and those sitting on your porch steps, all willing to lend a hand.
It's time for us to admit that we need help. Take that help and run with it and show appreciation.
And so I wanted to also share what reimagining alternative realities, hoping to get people to the denied future that they would have had because of these discriminatory practices. I also wanted to reimagine Indigenous and Black solidarity because it is not lost on me that aspiring Black homeowners were stolen from in the very same way that this land that we are all on was stolen from Indigenous people. So I would like to share with you a ceremony that I held at the site of one of the land sale contract homes in collaboration with a few Indigenous organizations here in Chicago.
That this project can continue to serve as a conduit, as a portal for us to understand how not only Chicago's Black neighborhoods, but this neighborhood specifically began to struggle with some of the issues that it had. And if we don't know this history, we can't acknowledge how resilient the pioneering Black aspiring homeowners were in this neighborhood. You know, when we talk about equity, when we talk about justice and undoing racism, we have to recognize it starts with people. People situate themselves in organizations and in policies, and they institutionalize their values, their beliefs, their attitudes into systems and into structures.
You have to find that place to heal, to move forward, and then be like, what do we do? How do we make this positive calculation? But I think this is a really good reset to speak on the healing, to reset, to say we dealt with that trauma.
I believe in the power of prayer, and I believe that because we are here right now and we have awakened this land, that This land right here is now a sacred ground that has the power to have a ripple effect into the community.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing so I can finally see people. And that is Inequity for Sale and Unblocked. If you are interested, you can Google and go to the corresponding websites or contact me on Instagram. I live there.
Thank you so much, Tonika. Thank you for sharing your powerful work, for shining a light on these critical issues of real estate, land injustices, all the things through your work. And just appreciate your dedication to really sparking these necessary conversations, advocating for change that's necessary and transforming landscapes of urban life. And I think you've just inspired so many people beyond Chicago, you know, to look at these issues and to see how they're showing up in their community. So, and then just also want to appreciate you for not just like shining a light on what exists, you know, a light on the past and the present, but also what the futures can be and what they will be. So appreciate that, and for you for recognizing also that intersection and cross solidarity with the Indigenous movement as well, and yeah, connecting with the community, because we need to be in these conversations. They're so important. So thank you again for your radical homecoming.
Thank you.
Yes, and I think there were some questions for you, and for all of my guest speakers. There were questions and comments flowing in, so make sure you check those out. And if you would like to respond to them, please feel free. So last but not least, of course, I am so honored to introduce our last speaker for today, Grace L. Dillon. And you will tell me, Grace, if I have pronounced anything wrong. Please correct me when you come on. But Grace is Anishinaabe and is a professor in the Indigenous Nations Studies Department in the School of Gender, Race, and Nations, and also affiliated professor at English and Women, Gender, and Sexualities Department at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon, where she teaches undergraduate and graduate courses on a range of interests, including Indigenous futurisms, Indigenous speculative fiction, queer, Indigenous, and Indigenous LGBTQAI2S+ theory, gender, race, and nations theory and methodology courses, and additional. I could spend years reading about her bio and all the amazing things she did. I'll name a few more things. Professor Dillon is a leading editor in the field, contributing to significant works such as the Routledge Handbook of Co-Futurisms, the pioneering collection of Indigenous futurisms and extrapolation. Of course, she is the coiner of the term Indigenous futurisms, and her notable publications include Walking the Clouds, an anthology of Indigenous science fiction, and Hive of Dreams, contemporary science fiction from the Pacific Northwest. Additionally, she has been actively involved in various boards and international committees like the Center for Indigenous Futurisms, the International Space Station's ethno-ISSS, which sounds extremely exciting. And her global influence is further underscored by her note as a keynote speaker at numerous international events, including symposiums on Indigenous futurisms and queer Indigenous theories. And she's going to be giving a presentation today called Inawenden, Everything in Life is Interconnected, Indigenous Futurisms Embraces Mizukamikwa, Mother Earth. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Che Miigwech, Rashida. And that was really, really beautiful. All of the talks, the art, what I think of as schoolactivism rather than just scholarship. The community activism that we're seeing, that Jace Weaver calls communitism, of these former talks of just, I saw someone saying, this is filling my cup, and that's how I feel. I feel like I'm overflowing right now. And what I'm going to do is just give some quick collages of, and interestingly enough, I too was combining Indigenous and Black solidarities very strongly for this particular angle. But I just wanted to mention Inawenden, Everything in Life is Interconnected, has already been brought up, that kind of idea, Indigenous philosophical thinking. But we also use the term Gakuna Wiwe, which means we are all related, Gakina Awiwe. And Mitsukumikwa, because we don't, as was earlier mentioned by Tanya, I believe that we have animism and we have living or not living as opposed to gender pronouns. Kwa there is actually a term for woman, but it can be queered very easily in our language of Anishinaabe, which I grew up with very fortunately. I want to honor the 10 local tribes that are federally recognized in our area. And in addition, the other tribes, and so Grand Ronde, Siletz, Warm Springs, and the list goes on for our area here in the Portland, Oregon area. And I am simply an Anishinaabe guest in that sense, and work with the communities here locally in the area, along with my communities back at home. And speaking of returning home, which was coming up also as a thought and idea, in our language, that means biskabiang, which we now use also for a term, more theoretical term of abstraction, decolonization. But really, literally, when I was growing up as a little one, it simply meant returning to the woods or returning to the bush, because that was home for us. And we were always, in that sense, either in the woods or gathering with our Gikandaso knowledges, medicines and foods and other kinds of things. And we had the what are now in permaculture called silva forests, or forested edible forests. And we practiced that and had for thousands and thousands of years, along with our many migrations as well. And I just wanted to note really quickly before plunging into this is that currently right now at Portland State University, we are also having interesting forms of encampments and homes that are taking place that was following actually the encampments and homes of those that were homeless in our area and were not able to move into some of the newly made buildings that my husband has a graduate course where students and community leaders actually get together and create homes. And we got this idea actually from Vancouver, BC, with Terminal Avenue, where for Indigenous artists, there are certain buildings where when you're an actor or actress, or, however you're connected to the entertainment industry, you can pay at the amount that you have. So sometimes when you're not working a certain gig, you have no money, so then you don't have to pay any rent. In other situations, with your gig, you were able to make a lot more money than everyone else in that community, and so you just automatically pitch in some more. And so we transferred that Indigenous idea of sharing and giving and native giveaways with setting up these homes, and often a series of really nice, what became really nice apartments with lots of parks and trees and beautiful shaded areas, and those were set up. So the encampment I'm thinking of right now, though, deals very much with Gaza and the many, many protests that we are having, rightfully so, I think, on our campus to protest the plowing over of mass graves of largely women and children. And so our students along with our faculty, although we are no longer called faculty with the incoming administration, we now only deserve the term employers, apparently. But together we employed along with students, have moved the encampment that we originally had for protest from the Portland public park blocks, because the city stepped in and said, well, this is, city land and you can't set up your tents and your camps here for any length of time. So during this past week, we had it shifted to Portland State campus area around the Miller Library. Our library had some exits left, so it could be used. The president of our campus talked with students and employees about the importance of freedom of speech and the ability to protest, and hopefully the ability to do it in a peaceful manner. And then just last night, and they said, and we'll send out police alerts if anything is going on. And so we got a police alert last night, and suddenly the language was avoid the area of what had become these homes, these homes for the moment that had become very, very important places to settle down, sit down, and spend a lot of time with each other, thinking through these ideas. We also, through the School of Race, Gender, and Nations, put on a lot of teach-ins and brought in people, really thoughtful thinkers and activists, to bring in some of the histories. Although I was just amazed at the history given here of going into the details of redlining in Chicago. Thank you so much for that. I learned features of that through listening to that. So, Chimigwech. In other words, homes for us, or returning home or returning to the woods, has for Anishinaabe people like me a very, very much a sense of moving and migrating and not staying in one place, because, for instance, you would not be able to gather the kinds of medicines and foods to eat if you didn't do that kind of form of migration. So what I'm going to do is just slip into a few thinkers, starting off with Josh Ojii-Cree, and just as a reminder of Ibram X. Kendi and philosopher Alex Shotwell and Perspectives and Controversies, an anti-racist and anti-colonial Anthropocene for our compromised times, that they do really remind us how sharply linked colonialism, extractivism, racial capitalism, and the approach to that is to be anti-racist, anti-colonial, anti-capitalist, and they explore that in some depth in that particular article. And so these ideas of encampments, returning home, but homes is ever changing to a certain degree, and in migrating form, fits in a lot of ways the idea of stewardship that had been brought up earlier so beautifully. And so Joshua Whitehead is himself Two-Spirit. That's what the 2S stands for. Two-Spirit Ojii-Cree, and has a few comments. I'll just take just a few from his beautiful book, Making Love with the Land, a book that came out in 2022. Just gorgeous to read it all the way through. And first of all, he talks about connections. I take a cue from my two-spirit cybernetic trickster Zoa and learn to re-augment my body, transgressive punk indigiqueer. I place myself into the film OG Cree in New York City and look up at that crumbling Avengers Tower in Glee, and he's referencing the Spider Comes Home film and how he's providing an alternate future imagination of it. I watch the structure come apart at its seams, laugh, think, yeah, that kid does have a future, and you'll be the one to see. Tell those vultures, by which I mean Wendigo, that they're colorblind, that the big green guy tearing down buildings is the Miho Mitapaha, Red Hulk, and this is in Cree, tearing down structures and institutions. If indigeneity is a vanishing act, it's one that we've perfected to ghost ourselves into the future. Just ask Frenchie, Jared, Martine, and all those two-spirit heroes, heroines who learn to live and love beyond body, space, and time. Here I am attaching those loosened minerals to my skin to emerge a diamond-crusted NDN, and I was thinking of the image of the diamonds on the beach with this, full metal and vicious in the light. I am not a whole thing. I am a web of fractures living in my brokenness, web like Okima apikakisis, trickster spider, who spun the original World Wide Web, all sticky with feeling and smooth as a weathered pebble. Connection, Joshua says, is a technology indigeneity perfected. And then just briefly, another quick thing, as you can see, he works with bio stories. At the end of this series of essays, he says he references indigenous futurisms and indigenous speculative literature and other things, but is still kind of finding his place, right, in what he wants to really call what he's writing. And that is the purpose of, to me, indigenous futurisms, is not to make it static and pull it into certain kinds of categories, but instead keep opening and opening it up through the ways of thinking and being that each artist is presenting. And so he talks about his elders telling me that when we set foot on a piece of land, again, a body, and I'll give the Anishinaabe for land as Aki, A-K-I, we simultaneously experience past, present, and future. Temporalities sing harmoniously beneath the print of our souls, tinkling through bone and membrane. The land is an archive, is a library, is a genealogy. A body of land is a body of literature. Water remembers. It maintains memories. It recalls the substances it has previously dissolved. Trees remember, and in their wounds is a witnessing of wars past, diseases eradicated. If the land can witness it too, we can listen. And it talks through what we might call living stories, the way a teepee ring would point to hunting grounds, the way a waterway directs one to community or home, the way a petroglyph enlivens communal and historical dialogue. And then he goes into Wawotan, which is, again, we are all related in Cree, in the Cree language. I did bring in also a number of Black writers, and I'm going to try to go through those very quickly for you with the sense of time going on and fast fleeing. Feeling, as Bettina Judd has put it, as a Black feminist in her Feeling, Creative Practice, Pleasure, and Black Feminist Thought, is how Black women artists approach and produce knowledge as sensation, internal and complex, entangled with pleasure, pain, anger, and joy, and manifesting artistic production itself as the meaning of the work. And actually, a lot of us as Indigenous collectivists and creators have picked up on her ideas because we are so close in ways to that. And so this particular sequence called This All Come Back Now, an anthology of First Nation speculative fiction. And these are all Australian First Nation writers, many of them Indigenous LGBTQ Two-Spirit plus. They're just really wonderful stories, but in terms of homes and buildings, there's a beautiful story by Tima Ball, An Invitation, and she's a practitioner of the Ballardang Noongar heritage, which she has. And she has a story where buildings start to disappear. And as the buildings are disappearing throughout the continent, she gets an invitation to write about or talk about architecture and buildings. And she's seeing these built environments from multiple positions, such as feminism, decolonialism, queerness, multiculturalism, anti-capitalism, or using First Nations conceptions of space and place. And she becomes very fascinated by this, the she-they character in this story, and talks about the desire to mutually reconstruct the colonial built environment, human-made structures, features, and facilities viewed collectively as an environment in which people live, work, and socialize, surged greatly in the era before buildings started disappearing. So this is the essence of the story, is that buildings are starting to disappear, and an Anishinaabe architect describes over Turtle Island, quote, architecture enacts violence against land and bodies, both directly through its physical presence and proximity to majority Indigenous communities, and diffusely through its existence as a node in a larger network that mobilizes violence on the ground. And this is all part of this story, where she's gotten an invitation to talk about this, and she's thinking it through. And she said, even though this reality permeates most Western cities, carving sadness into the land through slick metallic forms and multimodal structures that offer compact living, there's a sadness that enthusiastic planners and architects tried to alleviate by promoting allyship with marginalized communities and assembling pop-up parks replicating nature in high-density neighborhoods. And then she says, from her perspective, as a Black BLAK architect herself, but the sullen look in people's eyes persisted. They were aware of the grief they walked over, but were unable to verbalize it. Instead, they bought homes in desirable neighborhoods, cramming themselves into commuter trains to travel to office jobs they hated but depended on, where occasionally this sadness surfaced in the form of conversations about workplace diversity. And then it goes on talking about the built environment. And what was fascinating is, as these cities are dissolving during the climate catastrophe, they're being rejected by the idea, and she says here, the art of doing in these new geographies of emptiness, where there was nothing physically left to do but strangely appealing. Landscapes of nothingness were inherently queer, being stripped of the former architectural settings that fortified heteronormative lifestyles, had revealed that there was always something here that could hold the multiplicity of identity and expression. There was no loss for First Peoples in the architectural extinction. If the invitation implied that there was something to do, she wondered if she should accept it in order to celebrate nothingness instead. She could write about it as a method or practice, the art of doing nothing, of existing in nothingness, her only respite and resolve. Nothingness had no value within a Western capitalist framework, but had been the only way to break its cycle of grief. To have nothing, to just be, was the only thing left. And then I'm going to switch over very quickly to a few other voices that expressed community and allyship. And I'm actually jumping from Black Indigenous. She's of Cherokee descent, but lives in Toronto and has been a Canadian citizen for a while, Sanab Amadahe, and her book Resistance, which came out in 2014 as an Indigenous futurist text. And there, and this is a beautiful book just to take a look at, I would say. But there's a sense of the recentering of Indigenous lands and communities, because it starts off with a very mixed culture of a city community that's coming together and allying themselves together. So Black and Indigenous solidarity, along with many other BIPOC, including Latinx and peoples of color internationally. And what they do is they actually take a trip and a journey to an Anishinaabe, well, we would call it nation lands, but reserve in federal terms, and are given ceremonies, given prayer, and are quietly guided by elders and encouraged to return to their city to continue the allyship that they've been forming. So I thought that that was a beautiful kind of thinking of mutual reciprocity or mutual aid. And then a book that's not actually quite out yet, but oh, please do get this, is Andrea Hairston's Archangels of Funk is coming out this May. And she gifted me with an early copy so that I could see it. And so I don't want to give too much away here, but here you have a combination of the metallocentric biostory that Joshua Whitehead really loves to engage in, and Andrea Hairston with her background in quantum physics and just all different kinds of Indigenous sciences. Brings in so much of that as well. And I'll just note this little scene so that AI takes on a very remade quality in their home, and their home, which is the Ghost Mall. It's a mall that's actually, you know, just fallen apart like many malls have. And they're living there, and then she is living actually on her elder's farm that she inherited. And they were both Cherokee and Black, and were her grandparents. And so that also is a Black Indigenous combination. And so this is a description of the bots that shift from junk piles into mythic creatures of yesterday and tomorrow. Miracles 3, 4, and 5. Dragon's cellophane and aluminum body became a rainbow, burnt orange head, yellow neck, blue-green body, and purple tail. The pearl on her neck turned iridescent as the rotor legs whirred to funky beats, homage to Stevie Wonder, Patti LaBelle, and Earth, Wind, and Fire. Thunderbird tapped, and Thunderbird is Anishinaabe, by the way, tapped talons on an empty pizza tray, adding to Dragon's groove. He unfurled trash bag wings, white, black, and red. His scrap metal tail was inlaid with multicolored glass. Mommy Wata's snake, coils of LEDs also matched Dragon's rainbow. A thread of silver light trickled through her seashell locks as ocean pounded sand a water woman drum beat, the bot's transformation into a cyber funk band was always a thrill. Here come the archangels of funk. And later there's a moment, I'll just refer you to this, and then, you know, have fun with this book is what I say. But you start off with a centering of the Black Indigenous ways of forming homes, and ones that are not necessarily, you know, built up from cement and nothing like that. They're living with what they can. And it'll come out in May 2024. Yes, and all her other books, by the way, I should mention that her Redwood and Wildfire, and then We'll Do Magic for Change are earlier books that capture, and now Cinnamon has grown older, and she is in this kind of future where it's also noticing, so basically you have the ghost mall that they're living in, her elder's farm that she has to carefully go back and bike back and forth with. And then you also have the event horizon, and the event horizon is a home within a home, because those are the theater performances. They put on these cybernetic archangel funk festivals annually, and she helps pull it together. And those that are in the Ghost Mall participate and really, really enjoy it. And the contrast you have is an electric paradise, and you may very well figure out immediately where that's headed. And that is all gated up, and has also Valley Security's premium protection zone. And I was reminded of this with the suddenness of, oh, it's okay to protest at the Miller Library, and then suddenly avoid this area. You're not allowed into this area. Certain people you need to keep out, right? And so that's what the electric paradise is with their Valley Security. And now I have to watch time, so you guys just let me know.
Yes, we are officially beyond time, but you know,
Oh my
we made
goodness,
time
little
stretch
something.
here.
Yeah,
I
I
was
can
having a
send a
great
list.
time listening to you, so I didn't want to stop you, but
I'll send a list of the graphic novels, books, films, TV shows, some few examples that I had there for you, and my apologies, you guys.
no, please don't apologize. It was wonderful, and just really appreciate you, and thank you for your depth of insights, and for guiding us through, you know, this conversation around interconnectedness of life, different possibilities for defining home and community, and for conceiving of our relationships to the land. And I also just want to really appreciate and uplift your commitment to merging Black and Indigenous perspectives with speculative futures and providing that foundation for us. So appreciate that. Appreciate you. Appreciate, yes, you sending us an amazing list of stuff to check out, and we'll be sure to share that with the audience.
Okay.
All right, so I am going to close us out. Thank you so much for all the folks who are hanging with us beyond the time. You know, just as we conclude, I want to express my profound gratitude to all our speakers, attendees, everyone who contributed to making this a beautiful day, space time together. Your engagement, particularly on the Padlet, I appreciate everybody just adding ideas and possibilities there that can help us, just define what this looks like for us. And we've journeyed through discussions today that not only reflect on our past, but again, boldly imagine new futures, and not futures that are just ahead of us. Futures that are spiral, futures that are backwards, futures that are any orientation that we want. It's not all about deterministic, linear getting to the finish line. So really appreciate that we've explored that, and the confluence of Afrofuturism, Indigenous futurisms, ongoing struggle for environmental, economic, spatial justice, racial justice, all the things. Each narrative, each theory, each expression today further solidifies our ability to rethink and reshape the concept of home. So again, I thank you all. Thank you for your courage, your voices, your visions. Let's continue to dream. Let's continue to demand and to create futures where every home is a radical space for us to exist. Until next time, keep nurturing and wishing you all temporal abundance and spatial abundance.